Welcome everyone to the latest interview of the Irish Aviation Student Association series. Today, Aaron and myself are going to speak to Joe O'Mara, KPMG, who's the head of Aviation Leasing and Finance. So Joe, if you maybe just like to introduce yourself and your role in KPMG to students.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on, guys. So I lead our aviation finance practice in KPMG, and I'm a tax partner within that. So we'd probably be the largest professional services advisory firm in aviation. We've about 200 focused professionals on aviation finance. And my day-to-day job is mainly advising aircraft leasing companies or investors into those structures on their day-to-day tax activities.
Thank you. And for many of our listeners, this may be their first introduction to aircraft leasing. Could you just give an overview of why Ireland is a global leader in this industry, and in particular KPMG's role from the start of that?
Yeah, so most people will know kind of aviation leasing commenced in Ireland in the 1970s with GPA. KPMG were one of the first advisors to it, so we've been involved in the space as long as it's existed in Ireland. Why are companies here? They're here for, I would say, break it into two reasons. It's regime and it's people. And if you look at our regime, a lot of that is tax focused. So it's 12.5% corporation tax rate. It's an 8-year write-off when you buy an aircraft. But most importantly, you've got a really, really strong tax treaty network. So when you're dealing with, an international business like aircraft leasing, you've got cross-border payments coming from all over the world. Ireland's tax treaty network, allows leasing companies to receive those payments mostly free of withholding tax. That's the tax side. On the people side, as you mentioned, it really kicked off here back in the 70s. And from there, what you had is a growth of the mind and management within aircraft leasing within Ireland. So that skill set is here, and I wouldn't underplay that as the advantage it gives us when people are looking at, how do I fill out my finance, my legal, my technical, my marketing team? This is where the expertise is. And one reason I really like the sector is, the larger companies tend to be headquartered here. So the C-level executives tend to be based in Ireland, which, for a huge sector like this, sets us apart, I'd say, from most of the companies in the Irish economy.
In recent months, we've seen airlines struggling. Do you think that as aircraft return to service, that airlines will embrace aircraft leasing? You've seen quite a lot of sale and leasebacks in recent weeks and months. But what's your view on how aircraft leasing will develop in the next few months to the year?
Well, you have to think, why does an airline lease an aircraft in the first instance? And it's mostly due to flexibility. Aircraft are very expensive assets. You could have anywhere from 40 to 50 million up to 150 million dollars for a new aircraft, depending on whether it's a narrow body or a wide body. And leasing has only increased in popularity over the last 20 years. So when you look at the percentage of leased fleet, about 20 years ago, it was about 25%. And now it's about 45, maybe as near as 50%. So that flexibility has proved very, very attractive to airlines over a long period of time. And that's why you've seen an increase in the proportion of aircraft leased and an increase in the proportion of aircraft leasing companies that are in the market. If you look at the current crisis, well, what would it do? It will push demand down. So we're going to see less air traffic over the next couple of years. And that will mean there's just less planes flying. So we're probably going to see a retirement of some older aircraft. We've already seen a push out from deliveries on the order book, both from the larger aircraft lessors and from airlines. But if you look at airlines' balance sheets, to survive at the moment, what are they doing? They're taking on huge amounts of debt. So, north of $100 billion of debt have gone on to airline balance sheets over the last 3 or 4 months. And that's been a mixture of capital markets debt, external government support. And that means that they're going to be quite capacity constrained from a debt perspective. So it does mean that I would say the need or want to utilize the leasing channel as a financing mechanism for aircraft will continue to be very popular. And you're very right to point to the sale and leasebacks, of which there are tons in the market at the moment. Because if you're an airline and you're due to take a new delivery, you're absolutely going to be considering, well, can I get a lessor to fund that? And I'll enter into a sale and leaseback with them. Or if you've got aircraft on your own balance sheet, you're trying to monetize that asset to generate cash. So we've seen those transactions with the likes of Southwest and EasyJet, where they've taken, serious amounts of aircraft, put them out to tender and sale and lease back. And I do think that's a trend line you're going to see a little bit more of. Aircraft leasing is going nowhere. And you could argue that the tension this has put on the balance sheets of airlines, that if anything, it will become a more popular channel for how they'll finance future aircraft.
What do you think are the main challenges facing lessors in this environment?
I'd probably look at them across different ways, Aaron. So if you think about the different types of leasing companies that are there, I'd say you've got the large established players that have a long-standing parent and a good line of liquidity, and everything at the moment comes back to liquidity. So the challenges that lessors are facing is you've had this first round of deferrals, airlines have no cash, therefore they're saying, look, we really appreciate if you can give us a 3-month deferral on our lease rentals. Those deferrals are now coming to an end, and some of them are entering into a second round of deferrals. In the past, what you would have had an aircraft leasing company do, is consider whether or not it would repossess that aircraft and effectively seek a new customer for it. And that's always been a strong point to aircraft leasing is, the world was your customer. If you repossessed an aircraft that was operating in Asia, you could fly to the US to find a new customer. That's not available to them now. The amount of aircraft that are grounded, the demand isn't there. So repossessing isn't really an option. So they're having to work with their customers in a very proactive way. And I'd say if you talk to any aircraft leasing company today, they're not in the business of making airlines go bankrupt. Their entire focus here is to work with their customers. And that's what they're doing at the moment. That's taking up a huge amount of time. But on the other side of that, they need to be very careful of where their liquidity position is. If they're not getting paid rentals, that means they have a reduction in their cash coming in. And as I mentioned, if you look at the larger players, a lot of them have good lines of funding. So a lot of cash in their balance sheet, or they have a shareholder that can support them. So if you look at those larger players, you'd say, well, they're going to get active in the market. We've seen, Bank of China, Aviation be very active over the last couple of months in sale and leaseback transactions. SMBC announced the deal recently. And you've seen the likes of AirCap and Air Lease, even in this environment, be able to go into the capital markets and raise billions of dollars of debt. Just over the course of June, they've raised between them about $3 billion. So the larger players, I think, will survive this, but it's kind of bunkering down, working with your customers and see where it takes you. Some of the newer or smaller scale lessors are going to be more challenged. So those that maybe wrote transactions at maybe higher prices, at tighter lease rate factors, that there's going to be a tension in that market, and we'll see what happens on that side. So it is absolutely a very challenging time for leasing companies, but they are very resilient and they've been through downturns before. None, I'd say, as severe as this, but they've absolutely been through downturns before, and you would be confident that most of them will be able to manage this.
Very good. And just maybe looking on the mergers and acquisition side of stuff, like we haven't really seen much M&A activity with leasing companies in the past. Do you think COVID-19 will be a catalyst that we could see some big M&A deals with aircraft leasing companies going forward?
Yeah, I think you absolutely could see an accelerating factor to that. So if you think people don't like selling leasing companies, and why is that? It's because they generate a lot of profits and they generate a lot of cash. And that's historically proven over a significant period of time. What we have seen when we've seen large-scale M&A in the past, it's generally been driven by distress on the seller side. So if you think of the AirCap IFC transaction, if you think of the Avalon CIT transaction, large-scale M&A ultimately driven by distress at the parent level. And even looking at something like DAE buying AWAS, you had Terra Firma, a private equity crowd, who held on to that longer than they'd ever planned to. So it's usually dealt with, I'd say, historically over the motivations of the seller and pushed more towards distress than a strategic sell-off. We haven't seen, you're right, a lot of M&A over the last couple of years. I would think this would have to be an accelerating factor. And I know in some of the conversations I'm having with investors that are looking at the space, there is, even though the sector is in a huge amount of distress, there is a perception of value when distress comes in. So you get investors just thinking, there is potential value for me here, and I may have a distressed seller that I can deal with. What we've seen in the past downturn, so if you take the financial crash of kind of 08, 09, there was a time lag on when that pushed M&A through. It was probably a year, 18 months, 2 years before we started seeing some M&A feed into the market. I think it'll be quicker this time. I think that the level of distress will likely be an accelerant to M&A and consolidation. And if you look at the trend line of how aircraft leasing has gone, it's become far more diversified from, I'd say, a provider basis over the last 10 years. So if you go back to 2009, the top three aircraft lessors had about 70% of the market. At the end of 2019, they had less than a quarter of the market. And that's reflective of a whole lot new aircraft leasing companies that had come into the space. And that had an impact on competition and pricing. And I think those smaller players now that don't have scale, mightn't have the liquidity, mightn't have the committed shareholder, I do think we'll see more M&A around those types of entities and consolidation.
Yeah, and then I guess looking at like the airline side, we've seen a lot of consolidation. I guess like even if you look in Ireland, you saw IAG buy Aer Lingus a few years ago. We saw Ryanair buy Laudamotion. Do you think we'll see a lot of consolidation on the airline side as well? Or?
Yeah, the airline side is harder, right? And it's harder because you have issues from a regulatory perspective and a competition perspective that I'd say are more onerous than on the leasing side. And you also have certain amounts of pride, right? So where you have a national flag carrier, you know, in often instances, you have had support from the government in one way or another, be that debt support or equity support. So there is a sense of national pride in having your own airline and a strategic importance to countries from a tourism perspective. So I think there will be a bit of reticence, I'd say, for some companies and countries to allow those types of mergers and consolidations happen. If you look, I mean, it would be better for the market, I think, if it did. If you look at the US, is one that has gone through those rounds of consolidation. And if you look at airline profits over the last couple of years, they're massively weighted towards the US because effectively those airlines have their houses in order. So you would think it should happen. It would be the logical answer. I just don't think it will happen on a wide scale basis. And I think what you're seeing at the moment is pockets of support that are being given from governments to different airlines, but it's kind of happening on an ad hoc basis and sometimes without consideration of the quality of the underlying, you know, operation of that airline. So that there's a high likelihood in looking at how this situation will play out is that you'll have some, you know, not so good airlines being supported by governments, and others which absent COVID had a, you know, a valid and viable business plan, just, you know, not surviving. And then airlines, rather than consolidation, might go down the kind of formal restructuring route. So that's the type of US Chapter 11 type process that we've seen a couple of particularly South American airlines go into over the last couple of months. So rather than actually consolidating, you go through a formal restructuring process, which effectively allows you to, you know, hand back a lot of leased aircraft or renegotiate some of your debts, but hopefully come out of that process a kind of leaner machine that can survive. So I think those type of options might be more likely than widespread consolidation on the airline side.
What do you think the government can do at these times to support the industry and maintain its position in comparison to the likes of Hong Kong or Singapore and these areas?
Yeah, if we take it back to those tax factors that are very important in why companies set up here, I think the government's done a pretty good job and they've been very, very consistent. And I'd expect the new government to continue to go on that. As I mentioned, the three pillars to me on why we work for tax in Ireland is a 12.5% tax rate, which isn't special to aircraft leasing. It's just available for trading companies and is a cornerstone, I'd say, of our FDI government policy. That will continue. Capital allowances or tax depreciation over 8 years on your aircraft assets, again, not particular to aircraft leasing, that will continue. What the government could do is continue to push and expand the treaty network, and they're very actively involved in this. We've over 70 signed treaties. And the quality of those treaties is what differentiates Ireland from the likes of Singapore or the likes of Hong Kong. Because if you look at a comparative basis between Ireland, Singapore and Hong Kong, those domestic rules they're not a million miles away from each other. Your corporate tax drag will, you know, won't move the dial significantly. But if I'm in Singapore or Hong Kong and I can't lease to the US or I can't lease to India, it's going to be a massive impact on me trying to have a functional leasing business. What could the government do? I think it's important that they support the people side. So in addition to those pieces, which are the tax pieces, which are very important, one of, you know, you could argue as important a factor here is the expertise that is built up, but within leasing companies and the professional services around it. And it's doing things like you guys are doing, right? It's encouraging students into aviation related courses, and it's providing the supports for people moving into those areas, particularly at a time when people might be thinking it is a more challenged space, which it is, but you do think that'll pass.
Yep. We've got some great insights there into the industry, Joe. And I suppose just to finish off from the student perspective, what would your advice be to students currently entering the industry in the next 12 months? Or look to begin aviation-related courses?
Yeah, it's still a fantastic sector to be in. And as I mentioned, if you look at where Ireland sits within this sector, we punch above our weight massively within it. So when you're starting off on a student course or into a new career, you're making a long-term decision. You're trying to see, what am I going to do for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years? I've been working in this sector for 16, 17 years now, and I just really, really enjoy it. You rarely get to be at the center of the world from an Irish capacity. You get to do that in an aviation finance context. You also get, if you're not on the aviation finance side, you get to see and travel the world where you're working on some of the airline side. It's a fantastic career. I think there's huge opportunities within it, and it can be a very rewarding career, I think, both professionally from a development perspective and also from a monetary perspective. And if you look at the statistics that were put out by the CSO earlier in the year, aircraft leasing employs, I think, nearly 2,000 people directly in Ireland, and the average salary was over 6 figures. So it is a great sector to be in. It's absolutely challenged at the moment, but I'd be very, very confident if we're sitting down here in 12 or 18 months' time that we're in a much better place, and that Ireland will continue to be the centre of the world for aviation finance.
Thank you very much, Joe, for joining us today. And we are very grateful for KPMG's sponsorship of Irish Aviation Students Association, and just to have access to the likes of your knowledge and the industry knowledge.